Hey guys, my name's Lee Morris with Fstoppers.com, and today we're taking this toy car and we are turning it into this. All right, so here's the basic premise. I'm going to challenge myself today. I'm going to try to take a picture of this toy car and make it look like something that was taken on a real car shoot with a real full-size car. I've never done anything like this before, but this type of photography is becoming more and more popular. There's one guy in particular on the Fstoppers community named Felix Hernandez. His photos are unbelievable, and he actually builds the entire sets by hand. So he's not doing this stuff with Photoshop like I'm about to do. He's actually working on these things for days or weeks at a time. I don't have that kind of time on my hands. I'm gonna try to do this as quickly as possible with the least amount of gear possible. If I can pull this off, you can pull this off. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is create a little tabletop set here, and I don't want to photograph this car on this wood table because I'm actually going to use the shadow cast by the car in the background plate that I'm going to photograph it into. So I'm going to use just a white piece of foam core here, and I'm going to set the car on this white piece of foam core. And the reason why I want it to be just a flat, even piece of white foam core is that when I get into Photoshop, I can just change the blending mode and it will perfectly blend into the new background that I put this car on. Now, I could just photograph the car on this piece of foam core, but I'm a little afraid that because it's a black car and my background is going to go completely black when I turn the lights off in a second, I'm afraid that I'm gonna have a hard time finding the edge of the car and the background. So what I'm going to do, I just have a piece of computer paper here. I'm going to fold this in half and just kind of TP it behind the car here. And all this is going to do is give me a nice edge. So when I'm shooting across the top of this car, instead of seeing this dark back wall behind it, I'm gonna see this nice white piece of paper. It's just gonna make it easier when we get into Photoshop. All right, let's talk about the camera gear that we're gonna be using. I'm using our older Nikon D750 for this shoot and a brand new lens that I've never used before. This is the Tamron 90mm f2.8 macro lens. You're going to want a macro lens for a shoot like this because most normal lenses have a minimum focusing distance that is going to be significantly further away from this car than we probably want, and that makes the car really small in the frame. If you want to get as much detail as possible, using a macro lens is a must. As you guys have probably noticed, when it comes to shooting with our Nikon cameras, we've kind of almost exclusively switched over to Tamron lenses at this point, only because in our tests with these lenses, we've found that they're just as sharp in many cases, and they're almost half the price. All right, so let me go ahead and frame this shot up. And keep in mind, when you're framing a car up, you want it to be a realistic height. Imagine if the car was full-sized. You wouldn't want to be a little bit above the car. It would be okay if you were way above the car. It'd be like you're on the top of a building looking down, but just imagine that you were, you know, a person the size of the car. Where would you be photographing this car? I don't want to be too high above it and make it kind of this awkward downward looking view that doesn't feel natural. If I want this to appear to be a real car, I need to shoot it like I would a real car. So I'm getting the camera pretty even with it. I'm a little above it because that's where you would be. I'd be able to see across the top of the hood, obviously, and maybe I can even see the top of the car a little bit. This is a low sports car, but I'm not going to be able to look down on the car completely. Now, the next problem with this shot is the depth of field. You can see how shallow this depth of field is. I'm just shooting at 2.8 right now because this is a test shot. And this looks completely unrealistic because you would never shoot a full-size car and have shallow depth of field that's like a millimeter in depth. So what we're going to have to do is stop down significantly because we want this entire car to be in focus. So what I'm going to do is, instead of shooting at 2.8, I'm probably gonna go up to f32. And then I'm going to take my shutter speed down to 1 second. So you may be wondering why I'm going to be doing a full second exposure, and that's because I'm going to be lighting with a hot light by hand. This is the Litra Pro. These guys just sent this over to me. I had never even heard of this before, but this is one of the smallest LED panels I've ever seen, and it's dimmable and color shiftable, and it's waterproof, and it's got a battery built in, so you just plug it in with USB and it charges up. Now, when I first saw this, I thought, nah, it's kind of a gimmick. It just looks like some little toy or whatever. And then I turned this thing on and it is insanely bright. I mean, this is just as bright, if not brighter, than our other panels, which are 4 times the size or larger. And this can color shift, whereas many of our other small battery powered panels cannot color shift. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using this light, and instead of holding the light in one position and lighting the car, I'm going to be sweeping this light across the top of this car and around the side of this car. And the whole premise here is that if I have a full second to move this light around, then my light source gets larger. My light source becomes the entire track of this thing moving around. But if you look at how professional car photographers shoot, especially indoors, they are using gigantic Chimera softboxes that they hang above the cars to get these beautiful, nice hard lines and reflections. That's what the pros do, and we're actually going to be able to replicate that with this little handheld light. So let's give it a try. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the near side of the car. That's what's going to be the majority of this picture. And then I'm going to flick the camera into manual focus so that it doesn't try to refocus in between each shot. And I do have camera remotes and triggers and all these different things that I could use to complicate this, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go into the menu and I'm going to turn on interval timer shooting. And I'm gonna have this thing take a picture every second. And every second it's going to take a picture with a 1 second exposure. So every 2 seconds we'll have another shot. And then I'm just going to move this light over this car again and again and again in a million different ways. I'm gonna try to get shots where I'm lighting from behind, where I'm lighting from the front, where I'm lighting from above. And then when we get back into post, I'm gonna have a lot of options and I can combine the best elements of this car into one finished car. Now, you guys can see me right now because we have video lights on me and on the background here. If I want this to work, I need to have totally clean light coming just from the area that I'm actually shining this light. So we're gonna have to cut the lights off in here for this to work. But let me go ahead and take, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 shots, and let's see what we come up with. All right, that's it. As you can see, super simple. It only took a few seconds really, and we have a ton of different images to work with. Let's head into Photoshop and see what we can come up with. All right, so the first thing I did when I got into Photoshop was I used the pen tool and I started cutting out the shape of the car. Because the car didn't move, I could then put any of the car shots that we took into that, and this is the final car that I came up with here. And as you can see, I can drag and move this car around. And it doesn't look great right now. You're probably thinking that there's not much hope. But once we put this in a scene and once we anchor it to that scene using the shadow, it's gonna look 100% better. The next layer that I have down here, I'll hide this one and show this. This is just the bottom half of the car sitting on the white paper. This is what we're going to use to anchor the car with that shadow. That's gonna make all the difference in the world. And then this third layer here is a background that David just took when he was up in New York at PPE. And I told him that I had this idea for this shoot. And so I said, hey, if you just see any cool shot of the city at night, take that and I'm gonna put it in here. So I think this shot's gonna work great. The first thing that we need to do is we need to match up the car with the shadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this car down. I'm gonna lower the opacity, and then looking at the wheels here, I'm just gonna move this around until I get a perfect match. Now at this point, we can go ahead and turn on the background layer, and you'll see that we have the white of the foam core down below, which isn't going to work. But what we can do is click on that layer and change the blending mode to multiply. And what that does is anything that's white is going to disappear, anything that's black is going to burn into what's down below it. So already this is looking so much better. One thing I'm noticing, first of all, is that we need to place this car. The car looks kind of gigantic right now, and what I can do is hold shift and grab both of these layers and I can move the car around. If I move the car forward, the car becomes a little toy, and if I move the car backwards, it becomes Godzilla. So this is all about finding that perfect spot where it looks like a realistic size. The other thing, the car doesn't look straight to me. It looks like it's tilted forward a little bit, so I'm just gonna rotate this just a little bit and try to straighten it out. That's looking pretty good. Okay, something else that we can do to anchor this to the background is we can work on the reflections in the car. Right now you'll see this highlight that's along the bottom of the car that was created by the white foam core. Well, there's no white foam core here, so it doesn't look that realistic. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab the background here and I'm going to highlight this part of the ground, maybe like this. I'm going to copy paste, so it's right up here. So here's what it looks like. And then I'm going to go to edit, transform, and I always choose the wrong one. We're going to try vertically. Hey, I got it right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on top of the car. And so I need to move this layer up all the way to the top. And then I'm going to change the blend mode here to overlay. And you can see obviously this is way too dark. But we can play with the opacity here and we can get a realistic looking reflection without doing too much work here. I think that looks good. We're at 55%. Now the other thing that this reflection is doing, because we have overlay, you can see it's making a square around the entire car. So I need to work on that a little bit. What I'm going to do is create a mask here, and then I'm just going to paint out where I don't want this. I feel like the bottom half of the car looks good, but we're having kind of the same problem on the top. It's really dark on the top of the car, and I think in real life it would be reflecting those lights that are on the buildings in the back. So let's do the exact same thing on the top here. I'm just going to grab a random area of lights, and I think I'm going to stretch them a lot so that they look how they would naturally. Let's just see how this works. I'm going to hit Control-C, Control-V. So I'm going to drag this onto the top of the car, and then I'm really going to warp this a lot because I think that's what it would look like if it was reflecting off the car. And then maybe I should even edit, transform, skew maybe? Something like this, crazy looking. Okay, and then I'm going to hold Alt and click the mask button, and then I'm just going to paint exactly where I want this. So I'm going to choose white, paint exactly where I want it up here. And obviously this is really messy at the moment. We're gonna fix it in a second. All right, so that looks kind of crazy right now. Let's set this to lighten. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now we just need to go in and fine tune this mask and make sure that it's not hitting the city itself. All right, so if you flip this on and off, not a huge difference by any means, but I feel like we've just added a little bit more realism. Now the car's reflecting its surroundings a little bit more. Let's go ahead and add a color grade to this and wrap this thing up. First of all, what I'm going to do is come down here and click on Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to go to, let's go to Curves. I'm going to go down to the blue channel and mess with curves a little bit. Sometimes the easiest way to make something feel like it's part of a scene is to give it a color grade that is so wacky that it only makes sense that it was in that scene. All right, if we flick that on and off, I think it adds a little bit of interest to the shot. Let's try to add a little bit of amber to a part of this. That is all the rage right now. That's what the kids like doing. So we will go to, let's go to Photo Filter. And I'm really going to exaggerate this. And then let's pick a nice amber tone here. And then we've got a mask here that we can paint on. Let me close this tab group. And you can see I can just paint away what I don't want to be amber. Kind of looks like there's a street lamp or something off to the right, maybe. All right, so let's go ahead and crop this and see if we can come up with a finished image. I thought I was done with this image, and I just keep playing with it and playing with it, and I just had the idea, like, what if there was smoke or fog or something in the shot? I'm probably going too far here. I went on Unsplash, which just has free photographs that photographers give out to use for things like this. Ben Korgengevel donated this photograph. Thank you, Ben. Let's just see, and you can see it's probably Ben in this photograph, but the smoke looks kind of cool. Let me see if I can put this on the shot of the car and actually have this make any sense. All right, as you can see, I could work on this for another week and I could go into every little detail, but for the sake of this tutorial, I feel like we're done, and this looks pretty good. So that's it, guys. I gotta be honest, I wasn't totally confident in my skills, but I think the finished product is pretty good, especially for the little amount of time that we put into this photograph. And I think that the average person looking at that shot would not be able to tell that it's a toy car, especially a car that only cost me 15 bucks at Target. If you'd like to learn more about product photography in general, head over to fstoppers.com/store. You can learn from Brian Rogers. We did a tutorial with him called The Hero Shot. He is an unbelievable product photographer. He knows so much more than I do. And if you'd like to learn more about the gear that we're using, the camera, the Tamron 90mm lens, the Lytra Pro light, check out the description in this video for links to those products.